I'm going to share my honest thoughts on the best and worst books that I read in January in the hopes that you may be able to find your next read. So I read 10 books in January, and I'm going to let you know which ones I liked from the least to the best. Now, as I always say, please remember that book reviews are always subjective. We all have our own tastes, and what might be a 1-star book for me could be a 5-star book for you, and that's okay. But this month, I did something a little different with my rating system. Yes, in Storygraph, I still rated all of my reads between 1 and 5 stars using my normal rating system. But this year, I also started a matrix rating system. So basically what I do is I start with a grid like this. So you can see I have book A and book B. I'll put book A here and book B here. And then whichever one I liked better, I'll put in the spot. And then I expand the matrix as I read books. And then at the end of the month, I total how many times each book came out as the winner. So it's kind of like a bracket, except this will tell me like the complete order from worst to best, as opposed to a bracket, which will only tell you what you liked best. I think the star rating system and the matrix system have each their own value, but I do find that the matrix rating system is probably a bit more accurate. So I'm going to use that rating system from now on to figure out my worst to best reads. Sitting at number 10, we have How to Get Paid for What You Know by Graham Cochran. I picked up this book for free in the Audible Prime catalog. Why? I thought the idea was intriguing. I thought, what fun, interesting way could I, a person who knows a little bit about a lot of things, earn some extra money from what I know? Sorry about the sound. My external microphone just died and I don't have the time to wait for it to charge to finish filming this video. So I'm just gonna keep going with the microphone on my phone. Sorry if it's not as great of quality. But this book just ended up being your typical how to earn money from a training course online. And that's something I personally don't really want to do. Never say never, but I don't really want to put out a course right now. This book is largely based off of the author's own experience from releasing his own training courses, and it is written in a really approachable and easy to follow way. The structure is helpful because it lays it out step by step, and I will say his method for researching topics was really useful. The advice in it to me seemed a bit outdated, but if you're looking to create an online course, this might be a good, accessible starting point for you. Number 9 on my list is Convergence by Sharon Green. This story is about 5 people who each have an affinity for some type of elemental magic. Each of the characters are strong enough in their elements that they have qualified to compete for High Practitioner, someone who is skilled enough to challenge the fivefold blending, which is the current ruling group of the strongest practitioners in each element. This test for High Practitioner is not optional because it is tied to a prophecy that says that the fivefold blending will have to fight against the Four, a blending that once enslaved the land because they didn't have the element of spirit. The tests were created to ensure that the strongest blending was in power when the time of prophecy arrives. But does it really do what it says? Or is it just another mechanism that's been rigged so that the corrupt noble class can maintain rule? When I summarize it like that, this book should really be higher up on my list than it is. It's not that it was bad. I don't think I gave a single book on this list less than 3 stars. It just wasn't great. Sharon did create some very unique character voices. Every single character sounds different when you read their perspective. And each of our 5 point of view characters is going through their own personal journey. Rian, of all the characters, I think has the best character arc in this book. Although the whole time I was in my head chanting, please don't turn incel, please don't turn incel. And the jury's still out on that, which is honestly my main critique of this book. It doesn't have its own story arc. It just kind of ends. And it ends in a very to be continued way. But it's not on like a cliffhanger or anything. It just feels like they decided, and that's where we're gonna stop. Tune in next time. Sharon spends so much time describing every single test that the book overall comes off as very repetitive. There are new things that are revealed during each individual test, but you have to read the stuff that every other tester has already gone through in order to get to those new things, instead of just jumping to the new part in the scene. It got a little better once all the initial tests were done and the main characters met each other, but every single time they had to go to the testing center, I mentally groaned. I do plan on continuing at least through the next book, because I do want to get more answers on the overall plot, but I don't know if I'll make it through all 8 books in this series, or even the 4 that I have. Number 7 on my list is A Magical Girl Retires by Park So-yeon. Aroa is a millennial girl who is drowning in debt and unable to get a job. So she decides to jump off Mapo Bridge. Right before she's about to do that, she is stopped by a clairvoyant magical girl who tells her that she is the prophesied magical girl of time who will save the world from climate change. Hoping that she might have finally found her purpose, Aroa joins the Magical Girl Union. But will she manage to save the world with her fellow magical girls? So I know the premise of this sounds a little silly, but it's not. This book is a very succinctly crafted novel that tells a very deliberate story about the plights that women in South Korea are facing, from things like climate change, economic destitution, and misogyny. Sound familiar? At the very core of this book is a message that says the very first fight that a magical girl has to fight is the fight to save herself. Saving yourself is how you find your magical girl power. However, as we read the book to its conclusion, we find out that maybe in having to rely on your own powers by yourself to save yourself, you may have forgotten about the importance of community. This book is very well crafted and has a very good translation. As someone who lived in South Korea for 2 years, it definitely felt true to life there. However, I wish that there was a bit more exploration into the characters, because honestly, the villain was the most interesting character to me. How the Magical Girl Union is set up is really interesting. My biggest criticism of this book is just that I wanted more. It was so succinctly crafted that I felt a little bit let down in the character development and world building. Next up, we have The Winter Spirits: Ghostly Tales for Frosty Nights. This book contains 12 ghost stories set at Christmas, written by various authors. Of course, some stories I found that I enjoyed better than others. Mainly, I think the Krampus story was terrifying, but overall, I really enjoyed this collection. The characters aren't really likable, but I don't expect that in horror. And it was fun to read a horror collection set at Christmas time, because it's so antithetical to what I would normally read at Christmas. I also love short form horror. It just works for me. After that, we have Projections by S.E. Porter. Catherine and Gus have been friends since they were children. Catherine loves science and natural history. Gus is determined to become a sorcerer and drag Catherine with him to the sorcerer city of Nautilus, whether she wants to or not. When Catherine refuses Gus's proposal of marriage, he murders her and ties her spirit to him so that she will never be able to leave him. And as if that isn't bad enough, he uses her spiritual energy as a giant mystical battery, the main form of currency in this sorcerer underworld. So this is definitely a book that you want to pay attention to the trigger warnings before you read it, because it's a lot, especially if you are a woman. The characters in this book are not likable, but definitely memorable. And the world building is unlike anything I've really ever read before. It is very gothic in tone, and I'm honestly having a difficult time trying to figure out how to describe the world building where you have like avatars in Nautilus that represent like your true physical self, and as long as you're in Nautilus you can be immortal, but you can go back to the regular world, but you can't take your avatar. It's just a lot to wrap your head around, but not in a bad way. The pacing of this book is slow, but does have a satisfying, if brutal, payoff. You do need to just kind of accept that you're not going to understand what's going on for about half the book, but that you're going to want to keep reading regardless. And once you do understand what's going on, ooh, it's really good. The book is also wonderfully crafted in its use of perspective. The reveal of who Catherine is talking to, since her point of view is always in second person, is really good. This book is really weird, but you may want to give it a try anyway. Sitting at number 5 on this list, we have Blood of Hercules by Jasmine Moss. This is set in a post-apocalyptic time where monsters called Titans are roaming the earth. And Alexis and her foster brother have been homeless since their foster parents were killed by said Titans. Determined to bring themselves out of their situation through education, Alexis takes an exam that could get her a prominent position in, I think, the government. But you also have to do a blood test to see if you have any Olympian blood. As it turns out, Alexis is a Spartan, half human, half Olympian, and she is forced to join the Spartan War Academy, where she will be granted immortality if she survives. This book is wild. I honestly almost DNF'd it before the 3rd chapter, but I hung in there. And the reason I almost DNF'd it is because the prose are definitely very modern, and I'm not necessarily sure that's a good thing. But once she got into the Spartan War Academy, I found myself inhaling this story. I listened to the whole book in a day and a half. Is it good? No, not really. But I was invested in Alexis' story. While this is marketed as a dark throuple romance, honestly, the romance was the least interesting thing about it for me. The love interests are both honestly pretty terrible. What I was interested in was Alexis's trying to survive in this post-apocalyptic world. But they definitely spoiled the ending of this first book in the title. Number 4 on the list, we have Salem's Lot by Stephen King. So I talked about this book in my book versus adaptation for this month, so if you want to go really in depth, you can check that video out. I'll link it down below. This tells the story of Ben Mears, who is an author who returns to Jerusalem's Lot to investigate the Marston house in the hopes that he'll find inspiration for his next book. But the town is slowly being taken over by a very dark force, and Ben and his friends are going to have to try to stop it. I really liked all of the different characters in this book, although I did find them lacking in diversity, and the women are kind of all terrible. Again, I can excuse some of this because it was written in the 70s, but the richness of the themes in this book is what really got to me and spoke to me. This is the 3rd Stephen King book that I have read so far, and definitely my favorite. The personification of the town itself is such an interesting lens to tell this story through. The plot meandered a bit, but was overall satisfying. Number 3 on the list is A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. Cordelia is the daughter of a sorceress, and her mother has isolated and controlled her quite literally for her entire life. When a local wealthy family dies under suspicious circumstances, Cordelia and her mother flee town. They arrive at the manor of the elderly squire and his unwed sister Hester. Hester knows something isn't right with Cordelia, but can she save Cordelia, her brother, and herself before it's too late? This is the first fantasy novel that I've read by T. Kingfisher, and honestly, this is almost more of what I would call like a fantasy horror. It's like right on the border of being a horror story. She has this great way of blending humor and brutality that I haven't really found in another author. And her characters always feel really wonderfully real, even if they're bigger than life. The world, while not clearly defined, is kind of this amalgamation of Grimm's fairy tale and Jane Austen. And I found that really interesting. The plot was really well thought out and nothing felt extraneous, and I always really appreciate that in a book. I definitely binged this book in a couple sittings through audio because I needed to know what happened next. With this one, again, please check trigger warnings before jumping into it because it's a lot. And runner-up for my favorite book of the month was The Last Sister by Kendra Elliott. Emily Mill's father was killed 20 years ago, hung from a tree in their backyard. The death tore apart her family, driving her mother to suicide and her oldest sister to flee town. But Emily was moving on with her life. until she comes across the bodies of a young couple who were murdered in an eerily similar way to her father. The case brings FBI Special Agent Xander Wells to town, and he's gonna dig up some secrets that the town would rather keep buried. I really enjoyed this thriller mystery. The characters were really likable, even if they don't necessarily have the most growth throughout the span of the story. Kendra really encapsulated what I would think, I can't really say for sure because I've never been there, that small town Oregon feel. And her writing is very straightforward and easy to follow. The plot was really well developed, if a bit rushed at the end. She also did manage to subvert something I was convinced was going to happen, so I really enjoyed that. I also really liked the romance subplot. Overall, I just wanted to keep reading this story. Before I tell you my favorite book of the month, let me know yours down in the comments below. If you just want to let me know that you're here, leave me a unicorn emoji. My favorite book of the month was Small Talk by Cara Bastone. Jessie is minding her own business one night when she gets a "you up" text from her secret crush. She's convinced it's just a drunk text, but since she hasn't seen or talked to Elliot in 2 months, she decides to text him back. He's not drunk, but he did text her by mistake. It turns out they're both insomniacs, so they end up talking just about every night. Elliot has no idea who she is, and Jessie wants to keep it that way because if he did, he may not want to talk to her anymore. So I know that this sounds like a catfishing story, and it is, but it's also really cute. Cara Bastone really nails the romantic comedy vibes for me. Her couples always have the best banter. Elliot has great golden retriever energy, and Jessie is a badass with a heart of gold. One of my favorite things about this book is the community that surrounds these two characters, which is sad because I can't talk about that more without giving you major spoilers. The plot was really straightforward, and I enjoyed how the third act played out. There is a lot of intrigue around why Jessie doesn't want Elliot to know who she is, and I do feel like that payoff is satisfying. Overall, I really enjoyed the entire Love Lines series by Cara Bastone, and I think she's definitely going to be one of my go-to romance authors moving forward. If you're curious about what I'm going to be reading this month, check out my TBR video from last week. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.